The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach as it disappeared down the rutted road, leaving Clara Morrison standing alone in front of the burned ruins of what had been her family's ranch house, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled telegram that had arrived too late to warn them about her parents' accident in town 3 days prior. It was September of 1876 in the Arizona Territory, and the 20-year-old woman found herself suddenly responsible for 4 siblings ranging from 6 to 16 years old, with nothing but ashes, debt, and a small herd of cattle that had miraculously survived the fire that had consumed their home while they buried their parents. Clara's younger sister, Maggie, age 16, stood beside her with 9-year-old twin brothers Samuel and Joseph clinging to her skirts, while 6-year-old Beth sat on the ground drawing pictures in the dust with a stick, too young to fully comprehend that Mama and Papa were never coming home. The September heat bore down on them mercilessly as Clara surveyed the blackened timber and collapsed roof, trying to calculate how many meals they could manage with the $43 she had found in her father's lockbox that had somehow survived the blaze. "What are we going to do?" Maggie whispered, her voice cracking with fear she was trying desperately to hide from the younger children. Her auburn hair hung in a braid down her back, and her brown eyes were red-rimmed from 3 days of crying. Clara straightened her shoulders and pushed a strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear. "We're going to survive," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Papa always said the Morrison family was made of tougher stuff than most. We have the cattle, and we have each other. That's more than some folks have." "But where will we sleep?" Samuel asked, his freckled face scrunched up with worry. "The house is all gone." "We'll sleep in the barn tonight," Clara decided, glancing at the structure that stood 50 yards from the burned house. It had weathered wood walls and a decent roof, and while it was not meant for human habitation, it would keep them dry if the autumn rains came. "Tomorrow, I'll ride into Copper Creek and see about getting work. Maybe the general store needs help, or I can take in laundry." Joseph tugged on her sleeve. "Can I come with you?" "No, sweetheart. I need you to stay here and help Maggie watch Beth and take care of the animals. You're big enough for that responsibility, aren't you?" The boy nodded solemnly, puffing out his chest a bit. Clara's heart ached at how quickly they were all having to grow up. Just 4 days ago, their biggest concerns had been schoolwork and chores. Now they faced the very real possibility of starvation, or being split up and sent to different relatives scattered across the territories, none of whom had expressed any interest in taking in all 5 orphans together. They spent the rest of that day salvaging what they could from the ruins. Clara found her mother's cast-iron skillet, warped but usable, and a few pieces of cutlery that had survived. Maggie discovered a trunk of clothes in the barn that their mother had been meaning to mend, and though the garments were worn and some had holes, they were better than nothing. By nightfall, they had created a makeshift camp in the barn, spreading hay and covering it with horse blankets to make beds. Clara lay awake long into the night, listening to her siblings' breathing gradually slow and even out as they fell into exhausted sleep. Through the gaps in the barn walls, she could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Her father had taught her the constellations on nights like this, back when the world had made sense and tomorrow had always seemed full of promise rather than threat. She must have eventually dozed off because she woke to pale dawn light filtering through the barn and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Clara's back ached from sleeping on the hay, and her dress was wrinkled and smudged with soot, but there was no time for complaints. She roused Maggie quietly, and together they managed to get a small fire going outside to heat water and make a thin porridge from the oats they used for the horses. "Make this last," Clara instructed as she served small portions to each child. "We don't know when we'll have more." Beth's lower lip trembled. "I'm still hungry." "I know, baby, we all are." Clara knelt beside her youngest sister and smoothed her dark curls. "But we have to be smart about our food now. I promise I'll find a way to get us more." After the meager breakfast, Clara changed into her least damaged dress, a faded blue calico that had been her second best before the fire. She brushed out her hair and pinned it up as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror, using the reflection in a water bucket to check her appearance. She needed to look respectable if she hoped to find employment in town. "I'm leaving Buck here," she told Maggie, referring to their father's aging gelding. "Take Daisy, she's gentler and faster." Daisy was a dappled mare that Clara had trained herself, and the horse came willingly when she called. Maggie caught her arm before she could mount. "What if nobody will hire you?" Then I'll find another way, Clara said firmly. Don't borrow tomorrow's troubles, Maggie. That's what Mama always said. The ride to Copper Creek took 45 minutes across open country, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of cottonwoods that marked where water ran underground. The town was small but growing, with a main street that boasted a general store, a saloon, a bank, a hotel, a blacksmith, a doctor's office, and a handful of other establishments. Clara had been here dozens of times with her parents, but riding in alone made everything feel different, more dangerous somehow. She tied Daisy to the hitching post outside Brennan's general store and took a deep breath before pushing through the door. The familiar smell of pickles, leather, and tobacco greeted her, along with the sight of Mr. Brennan himself, arranging canned goods on a shelf. "Miss Morrison," he said, turning at the sound of the bell above the door. His expression shifted from pleasant to uncomfortable in an instant. "I heard about your folks. Terrible tragedy. Just terrible." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." Clara kept her voice steady. "I'm here because I'm looking for work. I know you sometimes hire help, and I'm a hard worker. I can stock shelves, help customers, do bookkeeping. My father taught me arithmetic." "Mr." Brennan shifted his weight and would not meet her eyes. "Well now, Miss Morrison, I'd like to help. Truly I would. But I already have my nephew working here 3 days a week, and business isn't good enough to justify another employee." "I'd work for less than standard wages," Clara pressed, hating the desperation creeping into her voice. "I just need enough to feed my siblings." "I'm sorry, I truly am." He at least had the grace to look genuinely regretful. "Have you tried the hotel? Mrs. Henderson sometimes needs kitchen help." Clara thanked him and left, blinking back tears of frustration. She tried the hotel next, but Mrs. Henderson had no work available. The doctor said the same thing. By noon, Clara had been turned away from every business in town, and the $43 in her pocket felt like a death sentence slowly counting down. She was standing on the wooden sidewalk outside the saloon, trying to decide whether to swallow her pride and ask if they needed a serving girl, when she heard raised voices from inside. A moment later, a man stumbled backward through the swinging doors and landed hard in the dirt street. "And stay out!" someone shouted from inside. "We don't serve drifters who can't pay their debts." The man in the street sat up slowly, touching his jaw where a bruise was already forming. He was young, perhaps 24 or 25, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his face. His clothes were dusty and worn, and his hat had fallen off to reveal a sun-bronzed face with surprisingly kind hazel eyes. He retrieved his hat and stood, brushing dust from his trousers with as much dignity as someone could manage after being thrown from a saloon. His gaze landed on Clara, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. There was something in his expression that was not shame or anger, but rather a sort of weary resignation, as though being thrown from establishments was not an uncommon occurrence in his life. "Apologies, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that suggested origins somewhere in Texas. "Didn't mean to create a spectacle in front of a lady." Clara should have walked away. A proper young woman did not speak to strange men, especially ones who had just been ejected from saloons. But something about his eyes stopped her. They were the eyes of someone who understood hardship, who had seen the world's rough edges and survived them. "Are you hurt?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He seemed surprised by her concern. "Nothing but my pride, and that's been bruised worse before." He settled his hat back on his head. "Name's Cole Thornton. I'd offer to shake your hand, but given the circumstances, I figure that wouldn't be proper." Clara Morrison. She glanced back at the saloon doors. "What did you do to earn such a dramatic exit?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Played cards last night with more optimism than funds. Thought I could win enough to pay for a meal and a room, but luck wasn't with me. I offered to work off the debt, but the proprietor had other ideas about debt collection." "So, you're broke and hungry?" "Broke, hungry, and apparently unwelcome in most establishments in this town." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "But I've been worse off. I've got my horse, my saddle, and my skills. That's enough to keep moving." Clara studied him more carefully. His clothes were worn but clean, where they were not dusty from his fall. His hands showed calluses consistent with hard work. Most tellingly, despite his situation, he had not asked her for money or tried to elicit sympathy. There was a quiet dignity in that. "What kind of skills?" she heard herself ask. Cole shrugged. I'm good with horses, fair hand at carpentry. Can mend fences, work cattle, break land for planting. Been a ranch hand most of my life, moving from place to place where work was available. He studied her face. Why do you ask? You looking to hire someone? The words came out before Clara could fully think them through. I might be, though I should warn you that I can't pay much. Actually, I can barely pay anything at all. Cole tilted his head, curiosity replacing the wariness in his expression. Then, why would you consider hiring anyone? Clara took a breath and made a decision that would change everything. Because I have 4 siblings to feed. Something shifted in Cole's face, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger and older at the same time. He was quiet for a long moment, then said words that Clara would remember for the rest of her life. Then I'll help you feed them all. You don't even know me, Clara protested, even as hope flared in her chest. You don't know anything about my situation. I know you're standing on this street asking after work to feed your family instead of begging or giving up. I know you stopped to check if a stranger was hurt instead of walking past like most folks did. Cole took a step closer, his expression serious. And I know what it's like to be hungry and desperate. If I can help, I will. We can work out the details. Clara's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I have a ranch. Or what's left of one. The house burned down 6 days ago. My parents died in an accident in town the day before the fire. We've been sleeping in the barn. I have some cattle, but I need help getting them to market. And I need to rebuild shelter before winter comes. I have $43 to my name and 4 siblings who depend on me. The youngest is 6 years old. Cole listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly. That's a heavy load for one person to carry. I'm not asking for charity, Clara said quickly. If you help me, I'll feed you as best I can, and when we sell the cattle, you'll get a fair share of the profits. And if I can rebuild, if I can make the ranch work again, there would be a permanent position for a good ranch hand. When do we start? Cole asked simply. You're serious? Just like that? Just like that. He picked up a worn saddlebag that Clara had not noticed lying near the saloon. I've got nothing tying me here, and everything you described needs doing soon if you want to survive the winter. We're burning daylight standing here talking about it. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear that had been pulled so tight she had forgotten it was there. My horse is tied up at the general store. Yours? At the livery. Give me 5 minutes to settle up there and retrieve him. Cole paused. I don't suppose you managed to get any supplies in town? No. Everyone either didn't have work or didn't want to hire me. Cole frowned. Wait here. He disappeared around the corner before Clara could ask what he was planning. She stood on the sidewalk, half expecting him not to return, wondering if she had just imagined the entire encounter. But true to his word, Cole reappeared 5 minutes later, leading a rangy buckskin stallion with intelligent eyes and a white blaze on its forehead. This is Ranger, Cole said, patting the horse's neck. He's gotten me out of more scrapes than I can count. He opened one of his saddlebags and pulled out 2 carefully wrapped parcels. It's not much, but I had some jerky and hardtack stored away. The kids can have it. Clara stared at the parcels. You're giving us your food? You said you have siblings to feed. I'm one man used to getting by on little. Kids need regular meals. He said it as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. That was the moment Clara felt the first stirrings of something beyond gratitude. Though she could not have named it then, this stranger was offering not just his labor, but his last resources to help children he had never met. In a world that had felt cruel and indifferent for the past week, his kindness struck her with unexpected force. They retrieved Daisy and rode out of Copper Creek together, Clara pointing out landmarks and explaining the route as they traveled. Cole was a good listener, asking practical questions about the size of the herd, the condition of the barn, and the state of the ranch's water sources. He did not offer false reassurance or make promises he could not keep, which Clara appreciated more than flowery words. As they crested the rise that overlooked her family's property, Clara saw it through his eyes. The blackened skeleton of the house, the weathered barn, the stretch of grazing land with perhaps 75 head of cattle scattered across it. It looked like what it was, a place that had suffered tragedy and was teetering on the edge of survival. It's not much, Clara said quietly. Cole studied the landscape with an appraising eye. You have good water, decent grass, and a barn with good bones. That's more than many folks start with. We can work with this." They rode down to the barn, where Maggie emerged looking anxious until she saw Clara. Then her eyes went wide at the sight of the strange man with her. The twins peeked out from inside the barn, while Beth ran forward, stopping short when she noticed Cole. Clara dismounted and gathered her siblings around her. "Everyone, this is Cole Thornton. He's going to help us. Cole, this is Maggie, Samuel, Joseph, and Beth." "Pleased to meet you all," Cole said, dismounting and removing his hat. He crouched down to Beth's level. "You must be the youngest. I bet you're very brave." Beth considered this seriously. "I drew a picture of our old house today. Want to see?" "I'd be honored," Cole said, and the sincerity in his voice made Maggie's suspicious expression soften slightly. While Beth dragged Cole off to show him her dust drawings, Clara pulled Maggie aside. "I know this seems sudden, but he's a ranch hand who needs work, and we need help. We'll give him a trial period. If anything seems wrong, he goes. But, Maggie, I think this might be our answer." "We don't know anything about him," Maggie whispered urgently. "I know, but I talked to him for a while in town, and my gut says he's trustworthy. We don't have a lot of options." Clara squeezed her sister's hand. "Trust me on this, just for a few days, please." Maggie searched her face, then nodded reluctantly. "A few days, but I'm watching him." That evening, Cole proved his worth immediately. He had a way with the children that put them at ease without being overfamiliar. He showed Samuel and Joseph how to properly groom a horse, explaining each step and why it mattered. He complimented Maggie on the way she had organized their limited supplies in the barn. He listened to Beth's chatter with genuine attention. For dinner, Clara made a thin stew with the jerky Cole had provided, some wild onions Maggie had gathered, and the last of their flour mixed with water to make rough dumplings. It was not much, but it was more substantial than anything they had eaten in days. As they sat around the small fire outside the barn, Cole shared stories of his travels that made the children laugh. He had worked ranches in Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, always moving when the seasons changed or work dried up. He had been born in San Antonio to parents who died when he was 14, after which he had made his way doing whatever work he could find. "Don't you have any family?" Beth asked around a mouthful of dumpling. "Not anymore, little miss, but that's all right. I've gotten used to making my own way." "Now you have us," Beth announced with the certainty of childhood. "We can be your family." Cole's expression flickered with something Clara could not quite read. "That's mighty kind of you to say." After the children were settled in their makeshift beds, Clara and Cole sat by the dying fire, talking in low voices about plans for the ranch. Cole suggested they start by doing a full count of the cattle the next day to know exactly what they had to work with. "If we can get them to market in Tucson before winter, that will give you capital to rebuild," he said, poking at the embers with a stick. "It's a hard drive for just 2 people, but if Maggie can handle things here with the little ones, we might manage it." "How long would we be gone?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on conditions. "It's not ideal leaving them, but the money from selling the herd would let you buy lumber, supplies, maybe even hire help for the rebuild." Clara chewed her lower lip, thinking. "Maggie's capable, but she's only 16. And what if something happens while we're gone?" "It's a risk," Cole admitted. "But staying put is also a risk. Winter comes early this far north, and that barn won't be comfortable when the temperatures drop." "Let me think about it," Clara said. "Let's see how the next few days go." Cole nodded and stood, stretching. "Where do you want me to sleep?" Clara realized she had not thought about that. "There's space in the barn, but it might be awkward with the girls. I can sleep outside, done it plenty of times." He smiled at her worried expression. "Don't fret, Miss Morrison. I've slept under worse conditions than a clear Arizona sky." "Clara," she said impulsively, "if we're going to be working together, you should call me Clara." Something warm entered his eyes. "Then you should call me Cole. Miss Morrison sounds like my school teacher, and she was a fearsome woman." Clara laughed, surprising herself. It felt strange to laugh after everything that had happened, but also good, like remembering she was still capable of joy. Over the following days, a routine developed. Cole proved to be everything he had claimed, hard-working, skilled, and reliable. He rose before dawn to tend the horses and check on the cattle. He repaired a section of fence that had been falling down before the fire. He rigged up a better shelter area in the barn so the children had more privacy and protection from drafts. Clara found herself watching him when he did not notice, observing the careful way he handled tools, the gentleness he showed with the animals, the patience he had with her brothers when they pestered him with endless questions. He never complained about the sparse meals or the hard work. He never made her feel like she owed him more than what they had agreed upon. On the fourth day, they did the cattle count together, riding out across the property to locate and tally every animal. The final number was 78 head, more than Clara had dared hope. At market prices, that could bring in enough money to rebuild the house and have something left over for supplies through the winter. "We could do it," Cole said as they sat their horses on a rise overlooking the grazing herd. "It won't be easy, but we could get these cattle to Tucson." Clara watched the animals, thinking about the risk and the potential reward. "When would we leave?" "Soon, another week maybe, to make sure the herd is in good condition for the drive, and to prepare Maggie for managing things here." "All right," Clara decided. "Let's plan for it." Cole turned to look at her, and there was approval in his eyes that made her sit a little straighter. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted, "but being afraid doesn't change what needs to be done." "That's the definition of courage," Cole said quietly. As they rode back toward the barn, Clara found herself acutely aware of Cole's presence beside her. It was not an uncomfortable awareness, but rather a sense of rightness, as though he fit into the space that had opened up in her life. She pushed the thought away, telling herself it was just gratitude talking. Cole was helping her family survive, nothing more. Getting romantic notions about a drifter, who would likely move on once the job was done, would be foolish in the extreme. But that night, as she lay in her haybed listening to her siblings sleep, Clara found her thoughts drifting back to the way Cole's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the solid, capable way he moved through the world. She imagined what it would be like to have someone like that as a permanent part of her life, not just hired help, but a true partner. She firmly told herself to stop being ridiculous and tried to sleep. The next morning, a rider approached the ranch. Clara tensed, remembering the debt collectors who had come sniffing around before the fire. But this was Mr. Brennan from the general store, looking uncomfortable as he dismounted. "Miss Morrison," he greeted her. "I hope I'm not intruding." "What can I do for you, Mr. Brennan?" The storekeeper glanced at Cole, who had emerged from the barn at the sound of hoofbeats. "I heard you hired a hand. Word travels fast in a small town." "Is that a problem?" Clara asked, keeping her voice level. No. Actually, I came because I felt bad about turning you away the other day." Mr. Brennan pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Your father, he had an account at my store. There's a credit of $27 that I completely forgot about until I was going through my books. It's yours by rights." Clara took the envelope with shaking hands. $27 would buy flour, sugar, salt, beans, and other staples that would help them stretch their resources. "Thank you," she managed. "This means more than you know." After Mr. Brennan left, Clara stood holding the envelope, feeling the weight of it. Cole approached quietly. "Good news?" he asked. "Very good news." She looked up at him. "I can buy proper supplies now, enough to stock Maggie up for while we're gone, and provisions for the cattle drive." Cole smiled. "Seems like things are starting to turn around." "It feels that way," Clara agreed. Then, impulsively, she added, "Thank you, Cole, for everything. I don't think I've said that properly." "You don't need to thank me. We're partners in this venture." But his eyes were warm, and Clara felt that flutter in her chest again. The following week passed in a flurry of preparation. Clara made a carefully planned trip to town with Cole, purchasing supplies and avoiding the curious stares from townspeople who were clearly gossiping about the Morrison girl and her mysterious hired hand. She ignored them, focusing instead on getting the best value for her precious dollars. They bought flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, and salt. Cole selected rope, a new bedroll since his was worn thin, and various small tools they would need for the drive. Clara splurged on peppermint sticks for the children, wanting to give them something sweet to remember while she was gone. Maggie took the news of the cattle drive with more maturity than Clara had expected. "I can manage," she said firmly. "The twins are old enough to help, and Beth listens to me. We'll be fine." "I'm leaving you the money for emergencies," Clara said. "And if anything goes wrong, you ride to town and get the sheriff. Don't try to handle things yourself." "I won't," Maggie promised. "Just promise me you'll come back." "I promise." Clara hugged her sister tight. We'll be back before you know it, and with enough money to build a real house again. The night before they were set to leave, Clara lay awake fighting anxiety. So much could go wrong. The cattle could scatter or stampede. They could run into rustlers or hostile territory. She could fail her siblings by taking this risk. But staying was also a risk, and at least this way she was fighting for their future, rather than just trying to survive day by day. Dawn came cold and clear. Cole had the horses saddled and ready before Clara finished saying goodbye to her siblings. Beth cried and clung to her neck, making Clara's heart ache. I'll be back soon, baby. Be good for Maggie, all right? I'll be very good, Beth sniffled. Will you bring me something from Tucson? I'll bring you something special, Clara promised, hoping she could keep that promise. Cole helped her mount Daisy, his hand steadying her elbow. Ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be. They set out with the 78 head of cattle, moving them slowly eastward toward the distant mountains. Cole had mapped out a route that would take them to water sources and avoid the roughest terrain. He estimated 2 weeks if everything went smoothly, possibly 3 if they ran into problems. The first day was exhausting. Clara had ridden horses her entire life, but spending 12 hours in the saddle while managing cattle was different from leisure riding. By the time they made camp that evening, every muscle in her body ached. Cole built a fire and made coffee while Clara tended the horses. The cattle had settled for the night, grazing peacefully under the enormous sky. The stars were coming out, and the air had that particular crystalline quality that came with autumn in the high desert. You did well today, Cole said, handing her a tin cup of coffee. I feel like I've been trampled, Clara admitted, sinking down onto her bedroll. It gets easier. Your body will adjust. He settled onto his own bedroll a respectful distance away. We made good time. If we can keep this pace, we'll reach Tucson in 12 days. They fell into comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and listening to the night sounds. Clara found herself studying Cole's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. He must have felt her gaze because he turned and their eyes met. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. Clara should have deflected, made something up, but there was something about the intimacy of the night and the isolation of their camp that made honesty feel possible. I was thinking about how strange it is that a week ago I didn't know you existed, and now I'm trusting you with my family's entire future. Cole was quiet for a moment. Does that worry you? It should, but it doesn't. She paused. You're a good man, Cole Thornton. I can see that. I just wonder why a good man has been drifting alone for so long. His expression grew distant. I suppose I never found a reason to stop. What about before? You said your parents died when you were 14. There must have been something that kept you moving. Cole stared into the fire. When my parents died, their ranch went to pay their debts. I had no other family, so I started working wherever I could. Over time, it just became habit. Stay a season, earn some money, move on before you get too attached to the place or the people. He glanced at her. It's easier that way, less chance of losing something that matters. Clara heard the pain beneath his words. That sounds lonely. It is, he admitted, but it's also safe. Safe isn't the same as happy. Cole's lips quirked in a half smile. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to lose people you love. Clara set down her coffee cup. But I also know that the answer isn't to stop loving. It's to love as much as you can while you have the chance. Something shifted in the air between them, a charge like the feeling before a thunderstorm. Cole held her gaze, and Clara saw vulnerability in his eyes that she had not seen before. Is that what you're doing? He asked quietly. Loving as much as you can? I'm trying to. Clara's heart was beating faster. My siblings need me to be strong and certain, but the truth is I'm making this up as I go along. I just know that giving up isn't an option. You're remarkable, Cole said, and the sincerity in his voice made Clara's breath catch. I'm just doing what has to be done. That's what makes you remarkable. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he stood and checked the fire. We should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day. Clara nodded, disappointed, but also relieved. Whatever was developing between them needed time, and they had a job to complete first. She settled into her bedroll, listening to the cattle and the crackle of the fire, aware of Cole's presence in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. The days blended together into a rhythm of riding, managing cattle, making camp, and moving on. They crossed scrubland and rocky terrain, skirted the edge of mountains, and followed creek beds where water still flowed despite the dry season. Cole taught Clara tricks for managing the herd, and she proved to be a quick learner, her natural horsemanship translating well to cattle work. They talked as they rode, sharing stories of their pasts. Clara told him about her childhood on the ranch, about her mother teaching her to read and her father showing her how to track animals. Cole shared memories of his own youth in Texas, of learning to ride before he could properly walk, of the year his father's cattle herd survived a drought against all odds. The more they talked, the more Clara felt herself drawn to him. It was not just his physical presence, though she was increasingly aware of that. It was his mind, his humor, his fundamental decency. He treated her as an equal partner, never condescending or dismissive. When she had ideas about managing the herd, he listened and often implemented her suggestions. On the 6th night, they camped near a rocky outcropping that provided some shelter from the wind. After dinner, Cole suggested they scout ahead on foot to check the route for the next day. They walked together through the gathering dusk, and Clara found herself hyper-aware of how close he was, how their hands occasionally brushed as they walked. "Look," Cole said suddenly, pointing upward. Clara followed his gesture and gasped. A meteor streaked across the darkening sky, bright and brief. Then another and another. They stood side by side, watching the celestial show, and when Cole's hand found hers, Clara did not pull away. "My mother used to say meteors were angels traveling between heaven and earth," Clara said softly. "That's a nice thought." Cole's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "What do you think they are?" "I think they're bits of rock burning up in the air. But I like my mother's explanation better." Cole laughed quietly. "Practical and romantic. That's a rare combination. What about you? Are you practical or romantic?" He considered this. "I've always thought I was practical, but lately I've been having some very impractical thoughts." Clara's pulse quickened. "What kind of thoughts?" Cole turned to face her, still holding her hand. In the dim light, his eyes were shadowed but intense. "Thoughts about staying in one place, about building something that lasts, about what it might be like to have a home again." He paused. "Thoughts about you?" Clara's breath caught. "Cole, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know we're in the middle of a job, and you have your siblings to think about, and a dozen reasons why this is complicated. But Clara, I need you to know that what I'm feeling isn't just gratitude or convenience. You've gotten under my skin in a way I didn't expect and don't quite know what to do with." Clara stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. "What if I told you I've been having the same impractical thoughts?" Cole's expression transformed, hope and desire mixing in his eyes. "Then I'd say we're both in trouble." "The best kind of trouble," Clara whispered. He cupped her face gently, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, as though they were both testing whether this was real. Then Clara rose on her toes and deepened the kiss, and Cole's arms came around her, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his chest. She could feel his heart racing as fast as her own. "Well," she said shakily, "that was—" "Yeah," Cole agreed, his voice rough. "It was." They stood holding each other as the stars came out overhead and the last light faded from the western sky. Clara felt like something fundamental had shifted in her world, like she had stepped off a familiar path onto new and uncertain ground. But with Cole's arms around her, the uncertainty felt less frightening than exhilarating. "We should get back to camp," Cole said reluctantly. "I know." Clara made no move to let go. He laughed and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Come on, before I forget I'm supposed to be a gentleman." They walked back hand in hand, and when they reached camp, Cole banked the fire, while Clara checked on the cattle one more time. Their bedrolls were still a respectful distance apart, but the space between them felt different now, charged with new possibilities. The next morning brought practical concerns. They were approaching rougher country, and the cattle grew more difficult to manage. Clara was grateful for the distraction of hard work that kept her from obsessing over what had happened the night before, but she was acutely aware of Cole, of the way he moved, the sound of his voice calling to the cattle, the occasional glances he sent her way that made her stomach flip. Whatever had started between them was real and growing stronger, and Clara found herself torn between elation and fear. By the 8th day, they had crossed the worst of the rough terrain and were making good time again. The landscape gradually shifted from scrubland to more cultivated areas as they approached the outskirts of Tucson. They began to see other travelers and signs of civilization. On the 10th night, with Tucson only 2 days away, they camped near a creek with good grazing. After securing the herd and making dinner, they sat together by the fire, and Cole pulled out a harmonica Clara had not known he carried. "You play?" she asked. "A little. My father taught me." He played a few notes, tentative at first, then launched into a melody that was both melancholy and beautiful. Clara closed her eyes and listened, letting the music wash over her. When the song ended, she opened her eyes to find Cole watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "It was my mother's favorite." He set the harmonica aside. "Clara, I need to ask you something. All right?" Cole seemed to be gathering his courage. "When this drive is over and we get back to your ranch, what happens then? I mean, between us." Clara's heart started to race. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to stay," he said simply. "Not just as a hired hand, but as someone building a life there, with you." He reached for her hand. "I know it's fast, and I know we have a lot to figure out still, but I need you to know that I'm serious about this, about you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I want you to stay. I don't want you to leave when the job is done. I want to build something together, a real home for my siblings and for us." She squeezed his hand. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Cole Thornton." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "I know I'm falling in love with you, Clara Morrison." This time when he kissed her, there was no hesitancy, only certainty and promise. They held each other as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, making quiet plans for the future they would build together. They reached Tucson 2 days later, dusty and tired but triumphant. The cattle were in good condition, and Cole had contacts at the stockyards who ensured they got a fair price. When the sale was finalized, Clara found herself holding a bank draft for $843, more money than she had ever seen in her life. "This is enough," she said, staring at the draft in amazement. "This is enough to rebuild the house and buy supplies and have money left over for emergencies." Cole grinned. "You did it. We did it." They stayed in Tucson for 2 nights to rest themselves and the horses. Cole insisted on paying for a hotel room for Clara, taking a space in the stable loft for himself to save money. Clara used the opportunity to bathe properly for the first time in 2 weeks, wash her clothes, and purchase a few supplies she had not been able to afford before. On their second evening in town, Cole took her to dinner at a modest restaurant, and Clara felt almost like a regular young woman on a courting outing, rather than an orphan fighting to keep her family together. They talked about plans for the ranch, for the house they would build, for the future. "I was thinking," Cole said over coffee, "that we should expand the herd next spring. With the money from this sale and careful management, we could buy breeding stock and really build something sustainable." "We?" Clara asked, though she was smiling. "We," Cole confirmed. "If you'll have me as a permanent partner, Clara, in every sense of the word." Clara's heart felt too big for her chest. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Cole reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm asking if you'll marry me. I know it's fast, and I don't have much to offer except hard work and devotion. But I love you, Clara. I want to be a father to your siblings and a partner to you. I want to build a life together." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole stood and came around the table, pulling her up and into his arms, kissing her thoroughly, despite the scandalized looks from other diners. Clara laughed against his lips, feeling happier than she had in months, maybe years. They set out for home the next morning, riding quickly now that they did not have cattle to manage. The journey back took only 5 days, and with each mile, Clara's excitement grew. She could not wait to tell her siblings the good news, to see their faces when she showed them the money and told them about Cole. When they finally rode up to the ranch, all 4 children came running out of the barn. Beth reached Clara first, and she scooped her youngest sister up, holding her tight. "I missed you so much," Beth said, squeezing Clara's neck. "I missed you too, sweetheart. But look what we brought back." She showed them the bank draft, explaining what it meant. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "We can rebuild. We can rebuild," Clara confirmed. "And there's more news." She glanced at Cole, who was being peppered with questions by the twins about the cattle drive. He caught her eye and smiled, and Clara felt that flutter in her chest again. "Cole and I are getting married," Clara announced. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Beth shrieked with delight, Samuel and Joseph whooped, and Maggie's face broke into the first genuine smile Clara had seen from her in weeks. "Really?" Maggie asked. "He's staying?" "I'm staying," Cole confirmed. "If that's all right with all of you, I'd like to be part of this family, if you'll have me." "Yes," Beth grabbed Cole's hand. "I told you we could be your family." Samuel and Joseph bombarded him with questions about whether he would teach them to do rope tricks and break horses, and Cole laughed and promised to teach them everything he knew. Maggie approached Clara more quietly. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Are you happy?" "I'm very sure," Clara said softly. "And yes, I'm happy. For the first time since Mama and Papa died, I feel like everything might actually be all right." Maggie hugged her fiercely. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." They spent that evening around the fire, sharing stories of what had happened during the weeks apart. Maggie had managed the ranch admirably, keeping the vegetable garden watered and making sure the younger children kept up with basic lessons. The twins had practiced their reading and done chores without too much complaint. Beth had collected rocks and feathers to show Clara. As Clara listened to her siblings chatter and watched Cole interact with them, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what family was supposed to feel like: safe, warm, full of love and possibility. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Cole hired a carpenter from town, and together they began work on the new house. It would be modest but sturdy, with 3 bedrooms upstairs and a large main room downstairs that would serve as kitchen and living space. Clara worked alongside them when she could, and Maggie proved surprisingly handy with a hammer. While construction continued, Clara and Cole rode to Copper Creek to speak with the pastor about a wedding. They decided on a simple ceremony in 6 weeks, giving them time to finish the house and make basic arrangements. Word spread quickly in the small town that Clara Morrison was marrying her hired hand, and the gossips had a field day with it. But Clara found she did not care what people said. She had Cole, she had her siblings, and she had a future. That was more than enough. The house took shape rapidly with multiple people working on it. Cole proved to be an excellent carpenter, and his attention to detail meant everything was built to last. By mid-November, the frame was up and the roof was on. By the end of November, the walls were completed and windows installed. They worked on interior finishing as December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the occasional frost. The wedding was planned for December 15th, giving them time to move into the new house first. Clara used some of their money to buy fabric and sewed new dresses for herself and her sisters. Cole purchased a new suit, the first he had owned in years. The night before the wedding, Clara stood in the completed house, marveling at what they had accomplished. The walls were bare, and the furniture was minimal, but it was warm and solid in theirs. Cole found her there, standing in the middle of the main room. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "Not even slightly." Clara turned to face him. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in 3 months. In September, I was standing in the ruins of our old house, thinking the world had ended. Now, I'm standing in a new house, about to marry the man I love. It feels like a miracle." Cole crossed the room and took her hands. "You're the miracle, Clara. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful. All I did was show up." "You did a lot more than show up," Clara said firmly. "You gave me hope when I had none. You worked beside me without ever making me feel less than your equal. You loved my siblings when you had no obligation to do so. You're a good man, Cole Thornton, and I'm grateful every day that you stumbled out of that saloon." Cole laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Best thing that ever happened to me, getting thrown out of that establishment." They stood together in their new house, holding each other and dreaming of the future they would share. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, perfect December weather. The ceremony was held in the small church in Copper Creek, with just a handful of people in attendance. Clara's siblings sat in the front row, Beth clutching the wildflowers Clara had let her pick that morning. A few neighbors came, and Mr. Brennan from the general store stood as one of the witnesses. Clara wore a simple dress of deep blue that Maggie had helped her sew, and Cole wore his new suit and looked so handsome that Clara's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, And when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt like her heart would burst with happiness. The kiss Cole gave her was sweet and full of promise, and when they turned to face their tiny congregation, Clara saw tears streaming down Maggie's face and Beth bouncing with excitement. They returned to the ranch for a simple celebration. Maggie had made a cake with the last of the sugar, and neighbors had contributed other dishes. It was not fancy, but it was joyful, and as Clara danced with her new husband in the main room of their new house, she felt blessed beyond measure. That night, after the children were settled upstairs and the last guests had left, Cole and Clara finally had time alone. He carried her over the threshold of their new bedroom, making her laugh, and set her down gently. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that," Clara said, reaching up to loosen his tie. "So do I." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, Clara. I'll spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Clara whispered. "Now come here and kiss your wife properly." The winter passed peacefully. Cole and Clara settled into married life with surprising ease, working together to manage the ranch and care for the children. The house stayed warm with the large fireplace Cole had built, and their small herd of cattle weathered the cold well. In January, Cole began teaching Samuel and Joseph advanced riding techniques and rope work. The twins were enthusiastic students, and Clara often watched them practice from the kitchen window, smiling at Cole's patient instruction. Maggie blossomed with the stability of their new situation. She had been carrying such a heavy burden of worry and responsibility, and having Cole there to share the load made an enormous difference. She began to act more like a 16-year-old girl and less like a second parent, laughing more and even shyly mentioning a boy in town she thought was handsome. Beth attached herself to Cole with fierce devotion, following him around and chattering constantly. Cole never seemed to tire of her attention, answering her endless questions and including her in tasks when it was safe to do so. He carved her wooden animals and told her stories at bedtime, and Beth began to call him Papa Cole. By spring, Clara knew she was pregnant. She told Cole one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the expression of awe and joy on his face was something she would treasure forever. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible." He pulled her close. "You've given me everything, Clara. A home, a family, a purpose. And now this." The baby was due in late September, and as Clara's belly grew through the summer months, Cole became increasingly protective and attentive. He insisted she not overwork herself, took on extra chores, and rubbed her aching back at night. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They purchased additional breeding cattle in the spring, and Cole's expertise with horses led to a side business breaking and training mounts for other ranchers. Money was not plentiful, but it was steady, and they were building something sustainable. In late September of 1877, exactly 1 year after Clara had stood in the ruins of her old life, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy in the bedroom of her new house. Cole was there for the birth, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And when the baby was finally placed in her arms, Clara looked up at her husband and saw tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Cole whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" Clara asked. Cole thought for a moment. "Thomas, after your father, if that's all right with you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "That's perfect." Thomas Cole Thornton was welcomed enthusiastically by his siblings. Even the twins, who had been skeptical about a baby, were quickly won over by his gummy smiles and the way he gripped their fingers with surprising strength. Beth was absolutely enamored, constantly asking to hold him and singing him songs she made up. As Clara recovered from childbirth and the rhythm of life with a newborn settled in, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. So much had changed, so much had been lost and gained. But sitting in her home with her husband beside her, her siblings thriving, and her baby sleeping in her arms, Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. Cole must have sensed her thoughts because he looked over at her and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about that day in Copper Creek when you literally fell into my life," Clara said. "I'm thinking about how I told you I had 4 siblings to feed, and you said you would help me feed them all." "Best decision I ever made," Cole said softly. "Mine too." Clara shifted baby Thomas to one arm so she could take Cole's hand with the other. You kept your promise, Cole. You helped me feed them. You helped me save them. You helped me build a life I never thought I could have. We built it together, Cole corrected. You were already strong and determined when I met you. All I did was walk beside you. You did more than walk beside me. You became my partner, my equal, my love. Clara squeezed his hand. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate woman with 4 siblings and nothing but ashes to her name. Cole leaned over and kissed her gently, careful not to disturb the baby. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing but his horse and his word. As the evening light faded and the house settled into quiet, Clara felt the rightness of this moment settle into her bones. This was what it meant to be home, surrounded by love, anchored by partnership, looking forward to a future full of possibility. The years unfolded with the predictable rhythm of ranch life, marked by seasons and milestones. Samuel and Joseph grew into capable young men who worked the ranch alongside Cole, learning everything he could teach them about horses and cattle. Maggie eventually married the boy from town, a kind young farmer named Daniel, and they settled on land adjacent to the Morrison Thornton Ranch. Beth grew from a chattering 6-year-old into a bright, curious girl who loved school and reading. She doted on baby Thomas and, when he was 3, welcomed a baby sister named Sarah with equal enthusiasm. Sarah was followed 2 years later by another boy, James, who inherited his father's hazel eyes and his mother's determination. The ranch prospered steadily. Cole's reputation as a horse trainer brought business from across the territory, and their cattle operation expanded gradually and sustainably. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On a warm September evening in 1885, 9 years after that fateful day in Copper Creek, Clara stood on the porch of her home watching her family. Cole was teaching Thomas and Sarah to rope a fence post, while James toddled nearby under Beth's watchful eye. Samuel and Joseph were bringing the horses in from the pasture, their voices carrying across the twilight. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from Maggie's chimney. Cole looked up and caught her watching. He said something to the children and then walked over, climbing the porch steps to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," Clara said, leaning into him. "How grateful I am for all of this, for you." Cole kissed the top of her head. "I'm the grateful one. You gave me something I never thought I would have. A home, a purpose, a reason to stay in one place." He paused. "A reason to believe in tomorrow. We gave that to each other," Clara said softly. "The day you said you would help me feed my siblings, you gave me hope. You gave me a future. You gave me love when I needed it most. And you gave me everything," Cole replied simply. They stood together watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had built from ashes and determination. Their children's laughter floated up to them, mingling with the evening sounds of the ranch. Somewhere inside the house, the clock that had belonged to Clara's mother chimed the hour. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked suddenly. "The wandering, the freedom of moving from place to place?" Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. "No," he said finally. "Not even a little. I thought I needed to keep moving to be free, but I was wrong. Freedom isn't about having no ties. It's about choosing the ties that matter and holding on to them with everything you have." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Cole Thornton. More today than yesterday, and I'll love you more tomorrow than today." "That's a dangerous promise," Cole said with a smile. "My heart might not be able to take it." "Your heart is strong enough for anything," Clara assured him. "It was strong enough to take on a desperate woman with 4 siblings and a burned-down ranch. It's strong enough to handle a lifetime of being loved." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Cole pulled Clara close and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion of 9 years of marriage. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Clara rested her head on his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. This was home. This was love. This was the life they had fought for and built together, piece by piece, day by day. From that moment in Copper Creek, when a cowboy had stumbled out of a saloon and a desperate woman had asked for help, to this perfect evening surrounded by family and promise. Clara had told him she had 4 siblings to feed, and Cole had replied that he would help her feed them all. But he had done so much more than that. He had helped her heal, helped her build, helped her love. He had given her partnership and equality and devotion. He had become not just her husband, but her best friend, her confidant, her other half. Inside the house, Sarah called out that she was hungry. Thomas wanted to know if they could have pie for dessert. James started crying for his mother. The ordinary, beautiful chaos of family life beckoned them back from their quiet moment. But before they went inside, Cole took Clara's face in his hands and looked at her with all the love and commitment that had sustained them through 9 years of joy and challenge. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for choosing me, for building this life with me, for giving me a reason to stop drifting." "Thank you for stopping," Clara whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for staying." They kissed once more under the emerging stars, then went inside together to feed their children and live the life they had created. A life built on a promise made in desperation and kept with love. A life that had started with 5 hungry children and a cowboy with nothing but his word, and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. As Clara tucked her youngest children into bed that night and listened to Cole reading a bedtime story in his warm, steady voice, she thought about all the paths her life might have taken, all the ways things could have gone wrong, the ranch they might have lost, the family that might have been split apart, the future that might never have happened. But instead, because of a chance encounter and a generous heart, because of determination and partnership and love, they had this. They had everything that mattered. And that night, as Clara lay in her husband's arms in the house they had built together, listening to the peaceful sounds of her sleeping children, she felt nothing but gratitude for the cowboy who had fallen into her life at exactly the right moment and promised to help her feed them all. He had kept that promise and so much more, giving her not just survival, but joy, not just help, but love, not just today, but all their tomorrows. The Morrison Thornton Ranch continued to thrive in the years that followed. Samuel eventually married and built his own house on the property, working as Cole's full partner in the horse training business. Joseph tried his hand at prospecting for a few years, but eventually returned to the ranch, admitting that there was no place he would rather be than home. Beth became a teacher in Copper Creek, riding into town each day and returning each evening with stories of her students. She eventually married the new doctor who came to town, a gentleman who appreciated her intelligence and spirit. Maggie and Daniel had 4 children of their own, and the 2 families celebrated holidays and milestones together, creating a web of love and support that extended across both properties. Thomas, Sarah, and James grew up surrounded by love, never doubting their place in the world or their parents' devotion. They heard the story of how their parents met many times, always marveling that something so good could come from something so desperate. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Clara by taking her back to Copper Creek, to the very spot where he had been thrown from the saloon and she had stopped to ask if he was hurt. "This is where it all started," he said, standing in the dusty street that had not changed much in 2 decades. "This is where you fell into my life," Clara agreed, smiling at the memory. "Best fall I ever took." Cole pulled her close. "I love you, Clara. 20 years married, and I love you more than the day I said I do." "I love you too," Clara whispered. "Thank you for saying you would help me feed them all. Thank you for keeping that promise." "It was the easiest promise I ever kept," Cole said, "because it was never a burden. It was a gift." They stood in that dusty Arizona street, 2 people who had found each other at their moments of greatest need and built something lasting. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and in the distance, they could see the mountains they had crossed together all those years ago. Hand in hand, they walked back to their horses and rode home together, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that as long as they faced it together, they could handle anything. And so, the story that began with desperation and a cowboy's kindness became a legacy of love that would be told for generations. The story of Clara Morrison and Cole Thornton, who met when both needed saving and saved each other instead, who built a life from ashes and promises, who proved that sometimes the best love stories start with the simplest words, "I have 4 siblings to feed, and then I'll help you feed them all."